Well, hello and welcome to Mystic Brew. I am Radagast at your service. So we're going to discuss what I'm going to put up is global community versus globalism, and only because the current mind that so many of us still possess is polarized, and but it's really not the global community that I really want to discuss versus globalism. It's really more like globalism versus the global community, and that's actually how I'm going to put it, because they are against the global community, and the global community doesn't need to be against them because our numbers are. I mean, the people who want to control things are statistically insignificant. It is the fact that they're in our heads that makes them not insignificant. And that's going to be a big part of what I want to pursue, going as these Mystic Brew videos go. And when I do Cosmic Emporiums, I'm inserting these things. When I join Hangouts, I'm inserting it. And I'm trying to insert the kind of narrative that existed on this planet and how we lived on this planet for thousands and thousands of years. The kind of community and the way we thought that allowed for the megaliths that we see, the gorgeous stonework, the obvious high technology that we still cannot duplicate today. And you might wonder, gee, to me, a really good point is why can't we duplicate that? Because we have decayed since certain concepts have come onto the planet and then dominated. Now, I am not in any kind of place to go to have that. I want to focus on little things, now on bigger things, but my phone just dinged. But not go up against that mind quite yet, although I'm going to dance around it, and those for ears to hear might hear it. So, the global community, and I will kind of elucidate what that is the human way of doing things, and then globalism is the alien way of doing things. It's top down. It's the one managing the many. And it's also divide and conquer, because by dividing the many, they're a little bit easier to manage. Infect their psychology with meism, which is facilitated by creating false scarcity on the planet. Of course, the introduction of Darwinism, survival of the fittest, as opposed to the fact that there are niches, and of course, the process to produce the strongest is always going to be there. That's called improvement. But the idea that there's this competition is not really there. Let's take a wolf pack. And they're very well organized, unlike coyotes. Coyotes don't have that structure. And so you'll have an alpha male and an alpha female, and then you'll have the betas, and then you'll have whatever designations you want to use for the ones that are kind of just not with it. There are certainly adult male wolves that'll probably die having never mated. And the reason why is that no female will allow them to mate with them, because they do not have the genetics in them to help her next litter be at least static, if not improved. To mate with certain of the wolf pack would degrade her genetic package. That's a form of natural selection that if humans had actually, if the common human had practiced it, we'd be in better shape. but that's another story. The Then you have the upper class practice it, and to me in a wholesome way. The elite practice it in a really unwholesome way, and they've paid the price. They don't chase the good genetics as much as they chase the bloodlines. And in chasing that bloodlines, they end up with lots of inbreeding, and of course that results in degradation of the line itself. So one is human and the other is alien to us. And the alien concept is in historic, as far as how long we've been on this planet, including building beautiful things. Gobekli Tepe is like 12 or 11,000 years old, and I might even do one just on that. But so Gobekli Tepe shows just the kind of technology we had 10, 11, 12,000 years ago, and we'll certainly be finding more. And then something happened on the planet, and I won't discuss that here. But there are certain, that one of those things that happened was a belief system that had a concept that we humans were fallen, that we had disobeyed a divine instruction. Women were the cause of all woes, and we won't just hit the biblical narrative. You see it in the Greeks as they move from the original Uranus and Gaia concept, and then all of a sudden the Titans show up. The moment the Titans show up, that is the beginning of the fuckery, because we existed for years knowing we had a divine mother, and then we had a sky father, where in fact the mother came from, and everything was peaceful, and they were balanced in the sexes, and it wasn't matriarchal. I mean, you'll see that women could own property. It was obvious that they could follow their own bloodlines because they knew everybody knew who the mother was. The father was always, we could be relatively assured. And then you look, but again, it wasn't like the women ruled. There was balance. Women have very unique qualities. Men have very unique qualities. You bring them together and you get coherence and functionality. If you break that equation, you get the dysfunctionality that we see in modern society, and the dysfunctionality that starts probably, we'll say roughly 5,000 years ago. So from the original primal myth of the mother and sky father, the Titans come in, and then you can see this alien infection start. And how does it start? We see that we hear that Kronos castrates his father. So in other words, he's and if tying into Grail kingship, if you're not, castration means you cannot be the king, and of course Uranus was not the king; he was the father. But where we see when we see this creeping alien concept come in, is that they have Gaia assisting her son Kronos to trick Uranus so that he can castrate his father. So see, here's the creep where the woman is bad. Woman as bad is part of the alien concept. All right, that's a marker, and that's how you can kind of track when this concept enters humanity and starts fucking it up. This is also when love of the divine starts to have aspect of fear, of punishment from the divine, another alien concept. So I'll end that there and get back to us. So the global community, one such nascent global community would be the YouTube community, where we don't have leaders, But we do have people who, because of the content they put out, are the ones that people go to. And they don't go because anybody voted and said, this is the person we all need to listen to. No, there is somebody who shows some wisdom, the ability, and some of them are very good researchers. We go to these people because they naturally give us what we think we need at any given time. And that's the natural selection. That's how things work. That's the organic human way. The appointed ones, like ones who kind of assume power, and then if you question that power, ooh, that's bad, that's alien. Okay? Again, questioning authority is alien. Because it's false authority. You either have authority, which means you are the author of good ideas that people naturally like and benefit from. You are an author of ideas that they have fruit from, that the community that is working from these authored ideas benefits from. And it's also open. Somebody, there might be one person who is more abundant in good ideas, but will not be the only source. And then the other ideas come in, and it is based on the fruit of the ideas, whether or not we deem them good or not. So the real global is. Now here's another thing. We don't want isms. Ism to me is when it's getting inorganic. It's starting to get codified. There'll probably even be rules. And when you hear about the ancient world, you don't hear about the old rules. You hear about the old ways, the old Tao. Okay? And there's a difference between Tao and which is way, and another word which means law. And I'm skipping that certain thing because, again, I don't want anybody getting triggered. And I've spoken with, so I have people that I love dearly that I know I would trigger using certain words. And I don't want that to happen because I would be seen as an adversary or maybe even demon possessed. And of course that would be coming from the mind virus that is protecting its installment in your psychology. So anything that might threaten that installment, it makes it it influences you to look at that person who threatens that installment and see them as an adversary, evil, demon, whatever. And Carlos Castaneda, who knows what book, when he mentions the flyers, and I almost like the word flyers better than archons, although they really are the same thing, because archon means ruler, so I'd almost like to save the archons for the scumbags who would rule us with, for their own benefit and their own cronyism. And actually the I forget what Sparta, and when you had the Greek, you had the Spartans versus the Athenians. And Spartans were, a warrior culture. Women could own property. It was very old. It was the old ways. They were getting a little warrior-like, but it was the old ways. The rulers of Athens were called archons because that's what it means in Greek. Archon means ruler. Another Greek word that is also in common parlance is heresy. What is it called? Heresy. If you look up heresy and if you get something that will give you a full definition, it means choice. It means to choose. It ultimately means choice, and then it starts to harden as there might have been a school of thought, and there were different schools of thoughts. So it was about choice. Once you get into dogma, once you get into codified rules for any thought system, then to choose what is not official or dogma to choose is what we now know as heresy. So, so for us to form a global community that we officiate, and we can do this because of the internet. Now, some people might come in and go, well, they did it, meaning the elite or something. The elite, what they did was they find our brains, they pull us out, they pay us, they tell us this has to be secret. They use our tax dollars. Again, they're parasitic. Well, they just use their station and their monopoly on violence through police, armies, and other things, and their fucking sickening legal system. They use that to be able to coerce people. But of course, all of that would not have worked had the mind virus not been installed prior to it. It facilitates it because it looks like, because the mind virus comes with a certain kind of cosmological setting, and so then it looks like as above, so below. So if you have your as above not configured correctly, your as below will also be not configured correctly. So the flyers, I like the way it's described there like Baroque. You can look that word up, and basically Baroque in many ways refers to a kind of a Byzantine concept. You might have to look that up. The Byzantine Empire was one of it. It was so thick with a structure that it was almost impenetrable. And the other sign of this is the constant dissection, the inability to apprehend concepts in their holistic, with a W, in their holistic understanding. The immediate thing often when we appropriate a holistic idea is to dissect it. And I've made that thing about dissection before, that it doesn't look like what it is. If you take a rock and find, you can pound it into sand, you can't put it back into a rock and now it's sand. Same thing with a frog, anything. So, and then now there are some really interesting concepts, and one of the things that influences us. I mean, many people in this community, some of them are still biblical truth seekers. There are people who are truth seekers and are quite biblical and have no problem. And then, of course, the other polarity is the New Age narrative. The New Age narrative largely grew out of the Theosophical movement, and if anybody who knows a little about the Theosophical history, they had it was Jiddu Krishnamurti who they had kind of identified. I guess it was Leadbeater and Annie Besant and a few other luminaries of the early Theosophy, and they had identified him as the one that would be the kind of Maitreya or world leader. And when he came of age, he publicly said he wouldn't assume it and actually denounced the Theosophy. I don't know if he denounced. He just said, no, this is not how things are done. So the New Age narrative is very much what we'll call a Luciferic narrative. And then we're going to have to break down how Steiner took that particular kind of that counter-human aspect and broke it into Ahriman and Lucifer, and I'm going to get to that because that's on the next line. I find one of the most amazing books I ever read, a set of books, was the Seth material. The books that Seth dictated, and this is one of the earlier channeled materials. It's really quite clean, and you can benefit from it. I will give some provisos. And it's so what happened was, here was a woman, Jane Roberts, channeling this entity, Seth. And I've I had an early girlfriend, and back in the hippie days, there was kind of like I was her main boyfriend, and then we all had secondaries. And one of her secondaries was part of the inner circle that was going to the sessions that where Seth was speaking, and so I got a chance to hear tapes. And unlike a lot of other of the modern channels, when Seth came into Jane's body, you could tell that somebody else was there. And so it is really, really, and I think the most powerful book he ever wrote was the second book he dictated. The first book was Seth Speaks. Second book was The Nature of Personal Reality, which I read after my first marriage had broken up. I was a complete wreck. It took me about a week to read the book, and I was restored after that. Just an amazing book. And one of the interesting things about Luciferic narratives is they give you a lot. It gives a lot of the goods. There's just omissions in that narrative that leave out the real connection. In many ways, what the Luciferic narrative is we are our own gods. And some of you might take a quote from like what from the Jesus narratives, ye are as gods, and think that means the same thing. No, because Jesus was coming from another narrative that the people he was speaking to knew, or were supposed to know. Obviously, some of the people that he kept company with, Peter especially, apparently he had a rock for brains. And you can hear in the narratives where Jesus said, "You spend all this time with me and you still don't get it." But the Luciferic narrative kind of takes us into this we are gods, but kind of leaves a very impersonal concept that you really can't hook into it, and it's not productive. Now then, and so I would say the Luciferic narrative is the New Age narrative. Okay, lots of good information, but the omissions are quite egregious to getting somewhere. And it feeds, and it's also very, you're allowed to think different things. Oh, think this, think this. I mean, it's caused the absolute mental mush and garbage of the many New Age things. I remember I got Sedona magazine for a few years, and finally I stopped because it was so obvious. I mean, almost every article was a channeled one, and Jane Roberts was the real deal. Seth was a real entity who was going to give us some really good information. Again, with a proviso that it was going to leave certain critical connections out. But it doesn't mean that there isn't a whole box of real goods. But leaving crucial things out is part of keeping us disconnected. So Rudolf Steiner is the man who was originally a theosophist. He saw that they were all screwed up, and so he started anthroposophy. Anthropo is man, and sophy is wisdom, so man wisdom. And just as I like John Lash, what he calls, instead of human beings, he calls us anthropines, just like cows are bovines and pigs are porcine, we're anthropine. So anthroposophy. He was really, he was great while he lived, and of course, as soon as he dies, what's behind? Books with words. And so then kind of, without maybe the word priesthood is not the right word, but people took over that role. And now if you go to any anthroposophical community, it is rigid. I mean, they still have the great ideas. They grow some of the biodynamic organic food, some of the best food in the world. It's magically delicious. But I don't think you'd want to live in one of their communities. They are stultified. In many ways, they have become Ahrimanic, and this is where I'll get into it. The difference between Lucifer and Ahriman, as ways of thought that are not the way, the Tao. Ahriman kind of represents organized religion. It's it's stultified. It's dogma in every real sense, and actually, it would be an Ahrimanic concept that would have things like what the word heresy has come to mean, like blasphemy. Ahrimanic concepts have blasphemy as part of their infection. The Lucifer is much more glitzy. It's more dynamic. It's more all about you. It's kind of narcissistic. And if you don't notice the me narcissism of so much of the New Age movement, then you haven't taken a good look, or you might be too much in the thick to stand in front of a mirror and take a good look. So, and the reason I'm doing this and even going down these roads is to have a global community. We have to know ourselves. Know thyself. But know thyself is real good, but once you know thyself, to have a community, we have to be a community of know thyself, which would be know ourselves. But without dogma. Because the other thing about the flyer mind, and especially the Ahrimanic mind, is there are thought crimes. The concept of thought crimes would be Ahrimanic, because there's dogma. And to leave dogma means that you have committed a sin. And what organized dogma is based on okay, so to know thyself is to kind of come into the mystical thing of where our connection with the divine is in real time. It happens in our hearts. The heart, I've said this before, that is where the communication happens. The third eye, we can see things, we can connect cosmic consciously, but in many ways, the crown chakra connects us to the Tao. The heart connects us to wisdom, or Sophia, the word for wisdom, and you can take that in different places. I won't. We'll leave it at wisdom and in our heart. So we need, and then from that dynamic in real time deliverance of wisdom into our hearts is how we can act in the commons with each other without having to refer to books. And one of the, to me, one of the things that really wrecked us was writing, because it forced us into linear thinking. It forced us into left brain thinking, and it's not and some people go, oh yeah, we want to be in our right brain. No, we want them working like the two sides of a V8 engine. All right, you need both of the hemispheres working in parallel at the same time. Now, sometimes, one, there'll be like minor shifts in this because there's a dynamic play between the yin and yang. I mean, think of your left and right brain as yin and yang. And that's not good and bad per se. It's dynamism. And so by taking, when we started using writing, not only did we kind of have to spend more time in our left brain because of the structure of it. Boy, this is getting a little hard to pull out of myself. But it also, the other thing about writing is it allowed for dogma at a written level. So then we, and one of the things that's common to most of the organized religions all across, is revelators. People who in real time get a revelation. It gets written down. And then there are priests that then will control the words in the book, create the dogmas, create the crimes, often punishable by death, that come from what gets written. Now, a very interesting thing that seemed to have happened, again, now we could, whether Jesus was a historical figure or not is not important here. But let's say Jesus was historical. The interesting thing is, during all this time with his disciples, at no time is there, okay, like you think maybe they'd have a scribe, right? Like what I'm saying is important, so let's write this down. Well, in his wisdom, he knew the fuckery that goes with writing shit down. I mean, okay? He knows that as soon as the person who dictated writes it down, then you get the scribes and the priests, and they start controlling the narrative, and it just gets ugly and deadly. It gets deadly. And if that isn't a sign that something is wrong, then because of what you're thinking in your head, or and a lot of it, and then of course what you think, and how you conduct yourself in the commons, and then now I don't want to get lost down there because this is coming up. This is on 30 minutes, and I just really want to kind of get back to the global community. So what we want to do is be able to start understanding that we need to love each other, because love, wisdom, and compassion for me are synonyms. These are all the things that we source in our heart. We source wisdom in our heart, we source compassion in our heart, and we source love in our heart, especially agape, which is like this really, love of it. Oh, you just kind of disappear into it. This is a rough delivery for me. And then I'm going to end with to form the global community, we're going to have to come out of the Luciferic New Age me shit show. Because that's the real virus in our New Age community. The Ahrimanic people are actually, in many ways, a little more loving because they have an idea. They're a little more settled. They're not running around quite so crazy, and they're doing their best to love, despite the fact that there's a lot of antagonistic things that sometimes get in there. So for me, it's the Luciferic memes that, and again, I'm not talking about Lucifer. I'm not talking about sacrifice. Please, that's a whole other thing. I'm talking completely at the mental plane, and the Luciferic plane is very third chakra based, and then it'll kind of skip the heart, and then we start getting into the third eye, which is why in the New Age it's about your third eye and your crown chakra, and so you get lost. Because your connection, our connection to each other, happens through our heart. The crown chakra is for connecting to the Tao, and the Tao is unknowable. The knowable Tao is not the real Tao, or the way. And so the global, everybody, because the crux of the matter is people, don't we want to be a global community? We do. We absolutely, it's time. This is our planet that we were given. We might as well come together as the sovereigns of this planet, get rid of the parasites who, claim to have us, but we can't do that until we can function. We are so dysfunctional, and part of that is these Ahrimanic and Luciferic systems that are in our heads. And we're going to have to break that programming to be able to form our global community. I mean, right now, the only thing really there's two things holding us back. And one is more language, okay? Let's go Tower of Babel. But language is probably the practical inhibitor. But even Google Translator can help facilitate that. The big inhibitor is our psychology. Okay, the language is an outer thing. The real thing is is the mind virus, and it's, and the flyers, the Baroque thinking, the Byzantine, even if if you're saying, oh, this such and such a thing happened, go, oh, what was the date? Date doesn't matter so much. I mean, again, it's like when you during around the fire, the Indians will say many moons ago, because they're letting you know this was a while ago. We don't need to track it on a calendar. The ancient calendar system wasn't so much about tracking time; it was about tracking seasons. It was, it was about when to plant, when to harvest. I mean, this is, and then of course any rituals were tied to celebrating these different markers and allowing us to help remember things. So we have to we need, if we're gonna, the real way to offset the globalists and avoid the separatism that comes from nationalism. And that's the other thing, is people are confusing, they're trying to create, oh, there's globalism and nationalism. No, there's globalism and then there's sovereignty. Okay? And sovereignty is locally based. It only makes sense. And then those various sovereigns interact with each other because we're all one, but it's culturally different. And I mean, a jungle culture is going to be different than a desert culture or a mountain culture. It makes sense that they're going to be different, but in those, from those different environmental situations, we still can have a common discourse. The internet has allowed it. The internet has allowed us to now communicate in a way that happened. The real break from telepathy happened when thought crimes started. When the fact that a thought could get you killed, that was the end of telepathy. All right, it was a survival mechanism. So I just felt that, because I'm hearing certain people go, like I'm reading forums and they're going, well, don't we want a global community? We do, but it isn't called globalism, and it isn't run by globalists. The global community has to be sovereign, has to be grassroots, but grassroots is going to have to be like a lawn and not like a bunch of special flowers that need their own unique treatment. I think I'm going to end that there at my 36 minutes. This is really a difficult kind of topic, but I could not address the global community versus globalism without getting to the heart of what's going on with us, and it's our psychology. It's the way we have been screwed with by the parasites. I really do want to direct everybody, please, newearth.com. I beg you, do not pick and choose. She has done her, especially the early videos, the Survivor series. You need to start with 1, go to 2, and go to 3. Once you've gotten the first couple ones out and you go, then you can jump around. Matter of fact, look. One of the interesting ones is Tokyo, where they show the kind of building structure in a supposedly Eastern culture, and it looks an awful lot like something you might have found in St. Petersburg. And then today, I should have loaded the picture. I saw a picture from 1902 of Hanoi, which apparently was also called Tonkin. I see the same kind of structures that Sylvie showed in Tokyo. And so I'm looking at when the French came in, and the French had gotten there in the late 1800s. And I'm looking at these buildings, I'm going, these buildings aren't 10 years old. So, and they're clear. And then I look at one where a building that the French did build like a little bit in the 1900s, and it's kind of Western, but you see the little flourishes with kind of curved arches, a slight kind of what we might think of as proper for that Southeastern Asian flavor. But the buildings that you see in Hanoi, there is none of that hybrid stuff. I see it clearly as the last bastion of survivor culture, and I don't doubt that one of the reasons the French went in there was to kill that culture. And I'm talking about the survivor culture, not the indigenous culture per se, because the survivors were the ones with the high science and understanding and good government, we'll call it that, but there are good man, words are bedeviling me. I should have prepared this, but we'll call it good government for now. And the kind of like the end of the 1800s, kind of going into the 20th century, they were in the process of wiping out all of the old culture, the old ways. All right, I'm going to leave it there. I hope I hope this cohered into something that is understandable. I hope that my language reveal what I'm trying to communicate and do it in a way that doesn't get people triggered. Because I'm coming from a place of love, and I want us to be all get into a place where we can love by clearing out all of the stuff in our heads, and that also that then will affect our hearts somewhat. So, be well. See you next time. Love yourself. I love you. Get out into nature more often. Get away from the screens. Eat good fruit, good food. And I'll see you next time.